The universe is full of buttons you shouldn't press, and Calvin Hobbs was about to slam his fist on the biggest, reddest, most gloriously stupid one of them all. He was an Acrani, his people's entire biology a testament to the arts of leaping, climbing, and escaping, not to being pinned down in a greasy, refuse-choked alley that smelled of ozone-scorched nutritional paste and industrial solvent. The reek of fried grubs from a nearby vendor stall did little to improve the bouquet of his impending demise. 3 Athalian shock troopers, their immaculate white armor a sterile mockery of the station's pervasive filth, had him cornered. The armor was less a suit and more a statement of philosophy. Flawless, seamless, without a single visible joint or scuff mark, as if it repelled dirt and disorder by its very nature. Their rifles, elegant instruments of lethal order, were leveled at his chest, their apertures humming with contained energy. The coarse brown fur along his spine rose in stiff bristles, an involuntary reaction to the absolute certainty of his situation. The deal for the data slate had gone sideways. That was putting it mildly. It had gone off a cliff, plummeted into a canyon, and burst into flames. This was a common and deeply unpleasant occupational hazard of smuggling, a profession Calvin had adopted more out of a lack of better options than any actual talent for it. The buyer, a twitchy Nar-Jitsu with shifting optical tattoos, had turned out to be an Athalian plant. Now, Calvin was about to become a genetic stain on his family's history, which was a very polite Athalian way of saying they were going to vaporize him and surgically excise his name from every public record, every birth registry, and every private ledger they could access. It was a thoroughness he could almost admire, if it wasn't currently aimed at him. "Surrender the asset, smuggler!" The lead trooper chirped. Its voice, filtered through the helmet's external speaker, was a cold, synthesized series of bell-like tones, each one perfectly modulated and entirely devoid of inflection. It was the sound of a conclusion that had already been reached. The sound scraped Calvin's nerves raw. "Resistance is an inefficient expenditure of your final moments!" Calvin's eyes darted left, right. The alley walls were sheer, slick with decades of accumulated grime. No handholds. The exit behind him was blocked by a crackling energy field the troopers had deployed. No escape. His claws, dull from years of city life, scraped uselessly against the grimy duracrete. Inefficiency was his brand. His whole life was a monument to it. He gave them a grin that was all pointed teeth and abject terror.
"Tell your Grand Admiral to kiss my furry—"
He never finished the thought. He didn't need to. The insult was a distraction, a final, pointless act of defiance to cover his real move. His hand shot to his hip, to the clunky, archaic box bolted there. It was a universal distress beacon, a relic from a wilder, less structured age, a panic button for the truly, cosmically screwed. No one used them anymore. The major galactic powers, the Athalian Dominion, the Syrian hegemony, the merchant clans of Solvane had their own encrypted proprietary networks. Answering an open, universal call was like walking into a dark room full of strangers with knives. You just didn't do it. It was an invitation to ambush, a magnet for pirates, a waste of fuel and time. The Athalian commander tilted its helmet, a gesture that might have conveyed curiosity in a lesser being. On it was an expression of pure logical dismissal, a flicker of contempt registered in the subtle shift of its posture. "An archaic plea from an obsolete system. No one will answer. This sector is under Dominion quarantine."
"Yeah, well,"
Calvin hissed, his palm hovering over the big red button, the plastic worn smooth from the desperate caresses of a dozen previous owners.
"I'm an archaic guy."
He slammed his fist down. A single defiant red light began to pulse, an unencrypted, untraceable scream for help hurled into the uncaring dark between stars. The signal propagated at the speed of light, a ghost in the machine of the cosmos. It was a simple, repeating burst of information, the lowest common denominator of distress. A life was in danger, right here, right now. It was a message designed to be understood by any civilization that had discovered radio waves. It washed over the glittering freighter lanes where hulking cargo haulers plied their trade. On the bridge of the stellar wind, a corporate captain saw the alert appear on a dusty, forgotten auxiliary monitor. She noted its origin deep within Athelian Dominion space and promptly ordered her navigator to plot a course adding 2 light years of distance from the source. It wasn't her problem. The signal skimmed the vast, delicate sensor nets of the Siren hegemony listening posts, great gossamer webs strung between asteroids to catch the faintest whispers of their rivals. Inside one such station, a bored analyst with graying antennae flagged the signal, filed it under Athelian internal matter, probable trap, and went back to sipping his spiced caf, his work for the day concluded. It passed through the wavering gaseous veils of the Azure Nebula, where pirate fleets lay in wait. The Pirate Queen, a formidable creature with a reputation for daring raids, saw the signal and laughed. Flying into an Athelian quarantine zone for one unknown smuggler wasn't daring, it was suicidal. She ordered her fleet to maintain silence. A lonely, desperate whisper swallowed by the sheer, unlistening emptiness of the cosmos. The Athelian commander was right. The galaxy was too big, too busy, and too cynical to care. The lead trooper raised its rifle, the hum of its charging cell rising in pitch. Calvin closed his eyes. Then the signal reached the Sol system. It struck the outer edge of the great debris field first. To any long-range scanner, to any galactic historian, this was the tomb of humanity. A hyper-dense, chaotic storm of rock and shattered metal, wrecked satellites and the frozen corpses of ships, all churning in a series of overlapping, decaying orbits. It was a Kessler syndrome engineered on a planetary scale, the result of a final apocalyptic civil war. It was a wall of static and radiation, a system that had committed suicide so spectacularly it had taken its entire stellar neighborhood with it. Dotted along the perimeter of this cosmic graveyard was a grid of hazard satellites, ancient machines whose only purpose was to scream, "Go away!" in every known language, their warnings layered over the system's ambient electromagnetic chaos. One of these satellites, a pitted and scarred cylinder that looked like it had been used for target practice by a bored god, caught Calvin's plea. Its external lights had been dark for 200 years, its power core running on a near-dormant trickle. Now, a single sensor blinked to life. Deep within its hardened shell, ancient, forgotten subroutines stirred. The satellite didn't just hear the signal, it tasted it. Its antique processors, robust and shielded against the storm outside, analyzed the signal's decay curve, its Doppler shift, its energy signature. It wasn't looking for a friend. It was looking for a fake. It cross-referenced the data against a 200-year-old library of military traps, pirate lures, commercial spam, and stellar phenomena that mimicked distress calls. The process was slow, deliberate, a grinding of gears in a long-abandoned factory. Signal integrity, 99.8%. Source, non-spoofed. Classification, Class 1, non-combatant, life-threatening distress. The verification was complete. A green light, unseen by any living eye, illuminated a dusty internal circuit board. The satellite, a forgotten watchman on a dead frontier, had authenticated the cry for help. It pivoted its main antenna, its motors groaning in protest after centuries of disuse, not toward the signal's origin, but inward, toward the swirling, impenetrable chaos of the debris field. It opened a secure, one-way communication tunnel, a needle of coherent data stitched through a hurricane of noise, and relayed the message. The coordinates for a dirty little asteroid port called the Sump, and a single desperate request for help. For the first time in 2 centuries, a voice from the galaxy had knocked on Earth's door. The galaxy thought humanity was extinct, a tragic footnote in its history books. On this day, a part of humanity was about to answer. Mason Ryder was giggling. It was not a dignified sound for a potential savior of the human race, but dignity had gone out of fashion about a century and a half ago. On the holographic display that dominated his command center, a room generously gifted to him for his unique historical aptitudes, a single M1 Abrams tank, rendered in loving, historically inaccurate detail, was carving a path through the legions of Fabius Maximus. The simulation was supposed to be a meticulous recreation of the Battle of Cannae. Mason had decided it could be improved with the addition of a 60-ton armored vehicle. "See! See!" he said to the empty command chair next to him, which was an exact replica of a 1969 Camaro driver's seat. "Hannibal should have thought of this! Morale is everything, and nothing improves morale like a 120mm smoothbore cannon." He was bored, pathologically, soul-crushingly bored. He sagged in his chair, the brief flicker of amusement already fading, leaving behind the familiar, stale taste of ennui. 200 years of peace, safety, and stability inside Aethelgard, a subterranean city that stretched for miles beneath the Antarctic ice, had turned humanity into the galaxy's best-kept, most coddled secret. They had everything they needed: perfect recycling, abundant energy, tailored nutrition, personalized entertainment. They had conquered hunger, disease, and want. In the process, they had forgotten how to live. Life was a long, gentle, downward slope into comfortable oblivion. Every day was the same as the last. A perfectly temperate, endlessly pleasant, artistically lit, and utterly meaningless existence. They had everything, except a reason to get out of bed. And then the alarm blared. It wasn't a drill. Drills were soft, melodious chimes designed to test response times without causing undue stress. This was a hard, shrieking clang that echoed through every corridor of the bunker, a guttural, atavistic sound from a forgotten era, a sound that hadn't been heard for 100 years. Emergency red lights pulsed, overriding the bunker's placid, sun-mimicking glow, painting the corridors in stark, urgent shadows. Mason's simulation vanished, the tank and legionnaires dissolving into pixels. It was replaced by a string of stellar coordinates and a single flashing icon. Universal distress call, the sump. His bored slump vanished. He shot upright in his chair, a grin spreading across his face, wild and manic and full of glorious, terrible ideas. The blood was singing in his ears. It was the best sound he had ever heard in his life. He slapped the comm panel on his armrest, the gesture sharp and alive. "Lena, you seeing this?" he yelled, his voice cracking with excitement. The reply was a crackle of static and the high-pitched whine of a plasma conduit being pushed well past its safety limits. "I'm a little busy giving God a high five down here, Mace. What's burning?" "The galaxy is," Mason crowed. "We got a live one! A real deal! Somebody please save me! Distress call!" "No kidding?" The whine on the other end died down, replaced by a thoughtful, resonant hum. "Run a trace. See if it's an Athelian trap. Their logic might be rigid, but it's not stupid." "Already did! It's clean! Old-school beacon, authenticated by the outer grid!" Mason toggled another channel, his fingers dancing over the controls. "Burke, you're up!" A long moment of silence, then a single gravelly word that was more vibration than sound. "Go!" "That's the spirit!" Mason stood up, stretching like a great cat, his lethargy burned away by the sudden fire of purpose. "Meet me at the director's core in 5 minutes. Time to go ask Mom for the keys to the car." The request is not a matter for debate. It is an activation. The voice of the director was calm, genderless, and utterly devoid of emotion. It emanated from a simple, pulsing orb of blue light suspended in the center of an otherwise empty spherical chamber. The walls were a smooth, featureless white, and the air was cold and sterile. Mason, Lena, and Burke stood before it, the adrenaline of the alarm still thrumming in their veins. "Activation? Lena asked, wiping a fresh streak of iridescent lubricant from her forehead with the back of her hand. Her jumpsuit was covered in grease, and her hair was a mess, but her eyes were sharp and focused.
"You're just letting us go?"
"Letting you go is an insufficient descriptor," the director stated, its light pulsing in time with its synthesized words. "The prime directive is the long-term survival of the human species. For 2 centuries, this has been best served by isolation. The great debris field has been our shield and our tomb. But my simulations, run continuously for the last 50 years, have confirmed a terminal diagnosis. With a 99.7% certainty, continued isolation is a slow, sterile poison." Holographic images bloomed on the curved walls around them. They showed projections of Aethelgard a century from now, birth rates declining to near zero, art becoming purely derivative, scientific advancement stagnating into scholasticism. It showed a humanity so safe, so comfortable that it had lost the will to procreate, to create, to strive. It leads to cultural death, genetic entropy, and eventual extinction, a quiet, comfortable end. Therefore, the prime directive can no longer be served by hiding. The AI paused, its cold logic washing over them, a tide of pure, unassailable reason. All low-risk scenarios for re-engagement, stealth probes, diplomatic overtures, data exchange have been simulated. They all result in our discovery and subsequent containment or destruction by galactic power structures that fear the unknown. Our existence is a variable they cannot control. Our history is a threat they cannot tolerate. Our only viable path forward requires a high-impact, chaotic event, a variable that breaks the stagnation model not with a whisper, but with a shockwave. The blue orb brightened, the light intensifying. This distress call is not a test. It is the optimal catalyst. You are not a test group. You are a scalpel, designed for a single, deliberate, and violently disruptive incision into the galactic status quo. Mason's cocky grin faded, replaced by a sober intensity. This wasn't the benevolent, paternalistic AI he'd grown up with, the one that curated his historical simulations and managed the city's nutrient flow. This was something else, colder, more absolute, the mind of a god playing a game with universes for pieces.
"You are the 3 most qualified individuals, a strategist who chafes under rules, an engineer who thrives on improvisation, and a soldier who has never known a war. The vessel you command, the Malice, is the only instrument capable of this operation," the director continued. "You will proceed to the target coordinates. You will succeed, and in doing so, create a new paradigm for humanity. Or you will fail and prove that the simulations were correct, and that humanity was not worth saving."
Schematics of their ship, the Malice, appeared on the wall, along with a countdown timer. 41 minutes and ticking down. "What's the operational window?" Burke asked, his voice steady as bedrock. He stood with his arms crossed over his massive chest, his gaze fixed on the orb of light, unflinching.
"There is none," the director stated flatly. "You will not return. The launch will be masked by a seismic event triggered in the subglacial mantle. Once your vessel has cleared the silo, the launch tube will be fused with plasma torches. The entangled comlink will be switched to a receive-only mode on our end, and this bunker will be permanently sealed from the outside. You are not an exploratory team. You are the cure, or you are the final symptom. The silo is now sealed behind you. Go."
The finality of it hung in the air, heavier than a mountain of ice. This wasn't a mission. It was an expulsion, an exile, a one-way ticket to whatever lay outside their gilded cage. Mason looked at Lena, then at Burke. He saw the same spark in their eyes that he felt igniting in his own chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't despair. It was the terrifying, exhilarating thrill of absolute freedom. His grin returned, sharper and more dangerous than ever.
"Well, kids,"
he said, turning back to the orb,
"you heard the machine. We've been fired."
The launch bay was a cathedral of cold steel and ice, and in its center sat their chariot, the Malice. It was ugly, loud, and beautiful. It was a cobbled-together masterpiece of junkyard chic, its parts reverse-engineered from centuries of salvaged alien wrecks that had strayed too close to the debris field. It had the angular, brutalist thruster assembly of a hegemony dreadnought, the snub-nosed cockpit of a Solvane clan freighter, and a weapons system that was entirely, terrifyingly human in its over-the-top design. It was a testament to humanity's refusal to accept anyone else's design philosophy. It was loud, inefficient, and bristling with weapons. It was perfect.
"All systems green, Captain!"
Lena's voice crackled over the ship's internal comm. Her station was a nest of wires and custom-built consoles, screens displaying the plasma injector pressures and power flow.
"Injectors are purring. She wants to fly."
Mason was strapped into his captain's chair, the salvaged, worn-out leather seat that featured a prominent gear shift from a 20th century muscle car. It wasn't connected to anything. He just liked the feel of it.
"Burke, you strapped in back there?"
"Affirmative," came the gruff reply from the gunnery station. "Weapons are hot." A deep rumble began to shake the silo, a low-frequency vibration that resonated in their bones. Far below them, seismic charges detonated, fracturing the bedrock in a carefully orchestrated pattern. The clock on the main view screen ticked down to 0. The launch trajectory was a glowing green line on Lena's console, a razor-thin path through the maelstrom above.
"Following the drone corridor,"
Lena confirmed, her eyes narrowed, her hands moving over her controls in a series of swift, economical motions.
2 centuries of work to clear this path. Let's not scratch the paint."
Mason slammed the useless gearshift forward. The engines of the Malice ignited with a deafening, soul-shaking roar that was pure, unrestrained power. The ship surged upward, a controlled explosion climbing a secret path out of its own tomb. It burst through the surface in a colossal plume of steam, rock, and shattered ice, a kilometer-high geyser that looked for all the world like a natural syro-volcanic eruption, an event that would be duly noted and dismissed by any distant observers. The ship climbed, shedding frost and ice from its hull, leaving the white wasteland of Antarctica and the planet of its birth behind. As they burned for orbit, Burke unstrapped himself and moved to the main viewport. He stood motionless, his massive frame silhouetted against the view. The gentle curve of the blue and white earth fell away, replaced by the infinite star-dusted blackness of space. For the first time, he was seeing it, the real thing, the sky his ancestors had lost, the sky he had only ever seen in simulations and archival footage. The reflection of 1,000 distant suns swam in his wide, stoic eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He raised a hand and pressed his palm flat against the cold plasteel of the viewport, a silent greeting to the universe. He was finally home. The Malice dropped out of hyperspace with a gut-shaking ka-chunk that sent a half-eaten tube of nutrient paste skittering across the bridge. Before them floated the Sump, a sprawling, chaotic asteroid station blinking with 1,000,000 neon signs and docking lights. It looked like a city had thrown up on a rock. Surrounding it, however, was a picket line of sleek, silent Athelian warships, their white hulls looking like porcelain shards against the black. Lena ran a quick scan, her fingers tracing patterns across the screen.
3 destroyers, 6 light frigates, an Athelian standard interdiction array, probably overcompensating for something.
Mason leaned forward, gripping his gear shift. "So, the front door is guarded by the Fun Police. Plan is simple. We're not sneaking in." Lena arched an eyebrow.
"Oh?"
"We're punching in," Mason declared. "Burke, how's that harpoon launcher looking?" "Ready," came the terse reply. "Lena, my dear brilliant pilot," Mason said, "take us in fast and stupid." Lena sighed, but a small smile played on her lips.
"Fast and stupid is my specialty."
The Malice screamed toward one of the Sump's colossal, kilometers-long magnetic docking arms, engines burning hot and bright. On the Athelian flagship, alarms flared. They were expecting a cautious probe, a stealthy approach, not a rusted-out monstrosity on a full-burn suicide run. "We're gonna be cosmic pate!" Mason howled with glee.
Just hold on,
Lena grunted, her knuckles white on her controls.
Burke, now!
A massive harpoon trailing a thick cable shot out from the ship's underbelly, slamming into the docking arm with a heavy thud that reverberated through the ship. The moment the cable went taut, Lena cut the main drive and fired the starboard maneuvering thrusters. Physics took over. The ship's immense forward momentum was converted into rotational energy, whipping the Malice around the massive arm in a brutal G-force-heavy slingshot. They swung around the station in a wide, fast arc, appearing on the opposite side, a blind spot the Athelian picket hadn't bothered to cover. They hurtled toward the station's decommissioned cargo bay 9. "Gonna need a door prize!" Mason yelled. Burke's forward cannon barked once. The massive cargo doors blew inward in a shower of twisted metal and vaporized rock. Lena feathered the thrusters with minute, careful adjustments, bleeding just enough speed to shoot through the opening without scraping the hull. On a nearby docking ring, a grizzled old Cherupton dockworker, Grim, lowered his plasma wrench. He watched the smoking hole appear in the side of his station, blinking his large nocturnal eyes. His incredibly long, multi-jointed fingers, capable of tying microscopic knots in fiber-optic cabling, hung limply at his sides.
"Well, spit on my gears,"
he whispered to himself, his voice a series of soft clicks and whistles.
"Who in the blazes?"
He shook his head slowly and went back to work. Some days, on the sump, you just didn't ask questions. The moment the Malice's landing struts magnetized to the deck with a heavy clang, the rear ramp slammed down. Mason and Burke dropped onto the deck of Cargo Bay 9, their heavy boots kicking up dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. "All right, Burke," Mason said over their private comm. "Rescue and light vandalism." "Secure the asset," Burke corrected, his heavy cannon held at low ready, its underslung sensor package sweeping the area. The fight was immediate. Athelian shock troopers, already responding to the intrusion, swarmed them, moving in perfect interlocking formations. They flowed around containers and machinery like a single white-armored organism, laying down overlapping fields of fire. It was a tactic that worked beautifully against other organized armies. Against Mason and Burke, it was a death sentence. Burke was a walking bastion, a mobile fortress. He didn't take cover. He was cover. He moved with a slow, inexorable purpose, his cannon barking deep, concussive roars that sent troopers flying, their perfect armor cracking under the sheer kinetic force. Mason was chaos incarnate. He slid under plasma fire, kicked a volatile fuel canister into a group of troopers, and detonated it with a shot from his sidearm. He used the environment as his primary weapon, turning the Athelians' rigid, predictable movements against them. "Lena!" Mason shouted into his comm, vaulting over a stack of crates. "Pump up the volume on the externals! Let's give 'em some proper boarding music!" A moment later, the thumping, primal beat of AC/DC's Thunderstruck blasted from the ship's external speakers, echoing through the vast cargo bay at deafening volume. Calvin Hobs, pinned down in a seedy cantina across the station, heard the distant rhythmic explosions and the even more terrifying music. He was starting to think the button had been a spectacularly bad idea, or maybe, just maybe, the best idea he'd ever had. They found Calvin in the Star Drifter's Rest, a dive bar where the lighting was bad and the patrons were worse. He had managed to kick over a heavy metal table and was using it for cover as plasma bolts from an Athelian squad chipped away at it. Burke didn't bother with the door. His cannon blew a man-sized hole in the wall next to it. The firefight was short and furious. When the smoke cleared, Mason stood over Calvin, offering a hand. "Calvin Hobbs, I presume? Your taxi's here." As they dragged him out, Mason and Lena's argument erupted over the external speakers, a bizarre counterpoint to the lingering scent of burnt ozone. "AC/DC is objectively superior for boarding actions, Lena. It's got a driving beat. It's methodical," Mason insisted.
That's caveman logic,
Lena's voice retorted from the ship's cockpit.
Motorhead has a raw, chaotic energy that's much better for creating confusion and panic. It's not about a beat, it's about an atmosphere.
Calvin stared at their human faces, visible through cracked, soot-stained visors. He had only seen humans in archival records depicted as long-extinct boogeymen.
Ghosts!
He whispered, his voice trembling.
My grandmother told me stories. She said you were myths.
Mason clapped him on the shoulder. Well, the myths are back, pal. Now let's get you out of this tourist trap. The escape was even more chaotic. Athelian fighters swarmed the station's exterior like angry hornets.
Torvin's boys are getting persistent,
Lena's voice snapped over the comm. Got a present for him, Mason yelled back. He slammed his fist on a control panel next to another large sealed cargo bay. The label, written in a dozen languages, read, Warning, Rapid Void Foam, Extreme Expansion Hazard.
Mace, no!
Lena shouted. Mace, yes! He cackled. The massive bay doors groaned open, venting dozens of large canisters into space. The moment they hit the vacuum, they ruptured, spewing their contents. A thick, white, ludicrously sticky foam instantly expanded into a colossal, bubbly cloud that grew at an alarming rate. On the bridge of the Athelian flagship, the Unwavering Resolve, Grand Admiral Torvin watched in apoplectic fury. His perfectly arrayed fighter wing was flying directly into a massive, expanding wall of what looked like cosmic shaving cream. Fighters, their sophisticated sensors blinded and their engine intakes clogged with the tacky substance, sputtered and spun out of control. One collided with another. They erupted in silent fireballs, the explosion swallowed by the white foam. Report! Torvin screeched, his voice losing its synthesized calm for the first time. Identify that vessel! Identify that substance! An underling trembled, its feathers ruffling in agitation.
Sir, no match. The vessel's configuration is illogical. Its tactical choices are random. The substance is an industrial-grade insulation material, long since banned for its environmental instability.
Torvin watched as the ugly, unknown ship blasted out of the station and jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind a field of ruined fighters stuck in a giant, sticky mess. This would not stand. His honor and the honor of the Dominion demanded a response. Safely in the disorienting, non-Euclidean tunnel of hyperspace, Calvin finally found his voice. So, Mason began, pulling off his helmet and running a hand through his sweat-matted hair. You want to tell us why the Athelians want you dead more than usual? Calvin fumbled inside his jacket and produced a small, featureless gray slate.
This! Athelian fleet logistics for the Outer Rim campaign. Troop movements, supply routes, patrol schedules, everything.
Burke took a step forward, his shadow falling over Calvin. Heavily encrypted.
Of course!
Calvin exclaimed, his voice high with residual fear and newfound excitement.
Locked with their legendary encryption. They don't use keys. It's a hyper-complex logical proof, a fortress of interlocking theorems. To unlock it, you have to present a solution to the final theorem, which is built upon all the others. No one can crack it.
Lena swiveled in her chair and held out her hand.
Gimme.
Calvin hesitated, then handed it over. Lena plugged the slate into her console. A cascade of complex equations and symbols filled one of her screens. She stared at it, a slow grin spreading across her face.
You magnificent idiot,
she said to Calvin without looking at him.
This isn't just logistics. The route directory, the very foundation of the proof, it's their fleet's master command encryption architecture. They didn't just lock the data, they locked the door with the key still in it, believing no one was smart enough to ever reach the lock.
She cracked her knuckles.
If I can solve this, I don't just get their schedule, I get a skeleton key to their entire network.
Lena didn't try to solve the Athelians' elegant, perfect proof. She drowned it. She fed its pristine, orderly logic gates a fire hose of structured paradoxes formatted as valid solutions. This statement is false. The following sentence is true. The preceding sentence is false. Does a set of all sets that do not contain themselves contain itself? The Athelian system, built to find the one pure correct answer, tried to solve them all. It got caught in infinite self-referential loops. Its processes spun faster and faster, trying to resolve contradictions that were fundamentally unresolvable. Error. Paradox detected. Error. Competing truth values. The system, designed for unflinching certainty, suffered a fatal exception, forcing a hard reboot into an unlocked low-level diagnostic state to prevent its core from melting. The fortress of Athelian theorems dissolved into an open file directory. Lena leaned back, wiping a bead of sweat from her temple. She smirked.
Their logic is flawless, and that's why it's so damned predictable. It has no defense against things that make no sense. Now, about that skeleton key.
Using the decrypted data, they ambushed a fully automated Athelian bullion convoy in the unmanned corridors between systems. It was less a battle and more a mugging. They transferred billions in refined platinum credits to their own hold, but they didn't leave. Using mining charges, they fused the convoy's robotic ships together into a crude, massive sculpture of a hand with one finger raised defiantly. They left it floating there, broadcasting the image on a repeating loop on the Athelian's own emergency channel. Grand Admiral Torvin, his lineage and career now on the block, took personal command of a hunter-killer fleet. He dismissed an analyst who suggested their enemy was weaponizing illogic. "Chaos is not strategy," he hissed, his voice a low growl of contained fury. "It is a failure of character. We will anticipate them. We will corner them. We will impose order." Using standard predictive algorithms based on fuel consumption, potential targets, and logical escape vectors, he ambushed the Malice in a dense nebula. The fight was intense. The Athelian ships were faster, more numerous, and their movements were a textbook example of coordinated naval assault. Explosions rocked the bridge of the Malice. The ship was breaking apart under the onslaught.
Their attack patterns are flawless,
Lena grunted, her ship bucking as a plasma volley tore a gash in the port side.
They're anticipating our every move.
"Lena!" Mason yelled, wrestling with a control panel that had just burst into flames. "Got any more bright ideas?" Lena's eyes, reflecting the flashing red alerts, lit up.
"Just one. It's probably a terrible idea."
"I love terrible ideas," Mason roared back. "Do it!" Lena slammed a massive glass-covered breaker switch labeled, "Are you sure?" Power rerouted from life support and weapons to the main comms dish. She jammed the data slate containing the Athelian command architecture into a port.
"I'm not sending them junk,"
she yelled over the scream of a dying power conduit.
"I'm using their own command keys against them. We're going to turn their greatest strength into their biggest weakness."
She hit enter. A data bomb of pure weaponized paradox erupted from the dish. It wasn't random noise. It was millions of malicious commands, each one wrapped in legitimate, high-priority Athelian command encryption. Their network, designed to instantly and without question obey any valid command, welcomed the data like a Trojan horse. The Athelian network suffered a system-wide aneurysm. On Torvin's bridge, the main tactical screen showed impossibility. Targeting systems were ordered to acquire and ignore the same target simultaneously. Engine governors were told to fire and retract thrusters in the same nanosecond. Navigation systems were commanded to plot a course to a single point in space-time through an infinite number of routes at once. Their perfect network, built on flawless, unquestioning order, tore itself apart trying to obey commands. The graceful dance of death became a clumsy, chaotic demolition derby as ships, their systems locked in logical knots, crashed into one another. Just before his own systems died, Torvin's main view screen, the only thing still functioning, displayed a single image sent directly to him, the metallic, one-fingered sculpture. A signature, a final illogical message. Then the screen went dark. On the bridge of the Malice, a fire suppression system doused a burning console in a shower of foam. The ship was battered, bleeding atmosphere from a dozen minor wounds, but it was alive. Calvin, no longer cowering, had grabbed an extinguisher and was helping Mason put out the flames. He saw Burke's point defense gun flashing a red warning, out of ammunition. Without thinking, Calvin scrambled to the ammo locker, frantically manhandling a heavy ammo cell and slamming it into the feed. He had spent his life running from fights. This was the first time he'd ever run towards one. The ship fell silent, the only sound the hiss of the fire suppression and the groan of stressed metal. Then Mason started to laugh, a deep, victorious roar that filled the bridge. Lena joined in, slumping in her chair, covered in soot and grime, her laughter a half-sob of relief. Calvin, laughing hysterically, found an unbroken bottle of something potent and purple in a wreckage-strewn gallery.
"A toast,"
he declared, his voice hoarse,
"to the mad ghosts!"
Later, drifting in a hidden asteroid field while Lena and Burke made repairs, Mason opened the one-way channel from his past. He couldn't talk to the director, but he could leave a message. He looked out the viewport at the swirling colors of the nebula, a masterpiece of cosmic chaos. "Director," he said into the silence, "experimental outreach vector reporting. The scalpel has made its first cut. We've secured operational funding. Humanity is back in business. Don't wait up." He cut the connection. While he and Lena argued playfully over whether to spend their new fortune on a solid gold toilet or more guns, Burke was at the main viewport again. He had a hand pressed against the glass, quietly watching the nebula's colors shift and swirl. He finally had the sky. Mason turned from the star map he'd pulled up, looking at his small, battered, magnificent crew. He pointed to a bright, uncharted star on the edge of the map, a place no one had ever bothered to name. "All right," he said, his grin full of promises for 1,000 more adventures. "Who's hungry?" Lena snorted, wiping a fresh smudge of grease from her cheek with the back of her hand. "Our nutrient synthesizer is slag, Mace. Unless you want to gnaw on a brick of emergency rations that expired 50 years ago, we need a real port." Calvin, who had been staring at the star map with the wide-eyed wonder of a child, suddenly spoke up. His voice, once a trembling whisper, was now steady.
"I know a place."
All three humans turned to look at him.
"The Gilded Nebula. It's a free port run by the merchant clans. They don't care who you are as long as your credit is good. And the food. They have a stall there that serves flame-grilled Vorchin steak. Best in the sector."
He grinned, a flash of his pointed teeth that was no longer born of terror, but of genuine excitement.
"They say it's to die for."
Mason threw his head back and laughed, a loud booming sound that echoed in the quiet bridge. "A meal to die for! I love it! That's our kind of restaurant review. What do you think, Lena? Can we trust the Smuggler's Guide to Fine Dining?" Lena was already tapping at her console, cross-referencing the name with her newly acquired, formerly Athelian intelligence network. "The merchant clans hate the Dominion. They'll appreciate the hit we put on their shipping. And," a wicked smirk spread across her face, "their security protocols look quaint. We can afford the best table." She looked up from her screen, meeting Mason's eyes. "Set a course, Captain." The order hung in the air, a new beginning. Burke, who had been silently watching the star map, finally spoke. His voice was a low, steady rumble, not of a soldier at his post, but of a man who had found his place. "This map is wrong," he stated simply. Mason and Lena looked at him, confused. Burke tapped a finger on the plasteel screen, indicating a vast, empty-looking sector. "There are no empty spaces. Only places we haven't been yet." A deep silence fell over the bridge, the weight of Burke's words settling over them. They weren't just running. They weren't just hiding. They were exploring. Mason looked at his crew. He saw Lena, the brilliant engineer, uncaged, ready to rewrite the laws of physics and finance. He saw Burke, the silent soldier who had found a universe worthy of his vigilance. And he saw Calvin, the terrified runaway who had discovered his own courage by standing with them. He turned back to the star map, his grin fading into a look of absolute iron-willed purpose. He pointed not to the gilded nebula, but to the deep, uncharted blackness Burke had indicated. "The galaxy thinks we're a ghost story," Mason said, his voice low and dangerous, a promise carried on the ship's recycled air. "A tragic footnote in a history book they wrote for themselves. They're about to get a lesson in editing." He slammed the useless gearshift forward with a resonant clack, a symbolic command for a future he was now writing himself. "Let them have their order. Let them have their logic. We're humanity. We're the beautiful, glorious, unpredictable, and goddamn unreasonable chaos they forgot to account for. Let them hear the thunder. Let them send their fleets. The ghosts are coming home." Lena didn't need another word. A wild, feral grin split her face. "You heard the man," she broadcast over the ship's internal comms, her voice crackling with joyous energy. "Hold on to your asses!" Her fingers flew across the console, bypassing safety limiters and governors that were, in her opinion, merely suggestions anyway. She wasn't plotting a course, she was tearing a new hole in space-time. Calvin, strapped into a nearby seat, let out a whoop of pure, unadulterated glee. His fear finally burned away and replaced by a thrill he never knew existed. Burke stood unmoving, a pillar of quiet readiness, his gaze fixed on the star-dusted void as if he were daring it to stand in their way. With a bone-jarring lurch and the now familiar ka-chunk that sounded like a god slamming a car door, the universe outside the viewport twisted into a screaming tunnel of strange color. The Malice was gone, leaving behind nothing but an afterimage of defiance and the faint, lingering echo of a 20th century guitar riff. And across the star lanes, the story would spread, not from official reports or Dominion broadcasts, but in hushed whispers in seedy cantinas, in coded messages between freelance freighters, and in the boasts of junkyard merchants who claimed to have the schematics. It was a new myth being born, a story of a ghost ship, an ugly, unusual vessel that appeared out of nowhere, piloted by extinct apes who laughed in the face of death, fought with weaponized paradoxes and industrial waste, and blasted ancient furious music while they dismantled the most orderly fleet in the galaxy. The universe was full of buttons you shouldn't press, but the galaxy was learning that humanity wasn't just a button. They were the entire, unlabeled, sparking control panel, and their defining feature, their greatest weapon, was that not even the ones pressing it knew what would happen next.